Jordan B. Peterson explored the concept of God as presented in the Old Testament, emphasizing that God transcends human categories and cannot be understood as real in the same sense as physical objects. Rather, God is hyperreal, the foundational reality upon which all else depends, existing outside time and space. This understanding rejects the typical atheist challenge, asking whether God is real, like a table is real. Peterson describes God as the substrate that enables the existence of time, space, and material reality, and highlights that biblical texts insist on God's ineffability and transcendence. Peterson makes a compelling argument that human beings perceive the world through stories, narratives that act as weighting functions, assigning different values to facts rather than treating all information equally. This weighting is crucial for psychological and biological survival because it manages the complexity of reality by prioritizing certain elements over others. According to Peterson, the cultural conflicts and the broader culture wars stem from competing narratives, often revolving around power, hedonism, or nihilism. The proper narrative, however, is one of sacrifice, which he elaborates as fundamental to reality itself, work, community, and human existence. Sacrifice emerges as the core story that underpins human life and society, Peterson explains. Attending to one thing necessarily means sacrificing others, and work is framed as the present sacrifice for the future, while community demands one sacrifice the self for something greater. Through biblical stories, the concept of sacrifice is explored as the continuous process that sustains a functioning society. He links this idea to contemporary social issues, such as declining marriage and birth rates, viewing these as symptomatic of a society unwilling to embrace sacrifice. The interview delves into interpretations of biblical narratives, starting with Adam and Eve's story. Peterson interprets the serpent not as a liar, but as a bearer of a complicated truth, encouraging humans to rely on their own discernment, which leads to their realization of vulnerability or nakedness. This vulnerability is then addressed by God, gifting them a protective coat, symbolizing good parenting that allows natural consequences and suffering to exist while offering protection. The narrative structure extends through Cain and Abel, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, and Abraham's covenant, tracing humanity's oscillation between pride, power consolidation, and family-centered sacrifice. Peterson highlights Abraham's story as an archetype of sacrificial progression and upward spiritual adventure. Abraham's covenant with God is portrayed as a bargain, forsaking comfort to become a blessing to himself and others. The spirit of adventure is the driving force behind growth, sacrifice, and social cohesion. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice, symbolized most vividly in the command to offer his son, represents the willingness to subordinate immediate personal desires to a higher purpose, which fosters competence, stability, and long-term flourishing. A significant theme in Peterson's book and conversation is the unification of modern scientific understanding with deep theological insights. He relates the structure of stories to neurological and linguistic models, such as large language models that reveal how meaning and symbolism function statistically. He claims there is now a hard science of symbolism, where the symbolic universe and cognitive perception are mapped scientifically. This synthesis supports the biblical insistence that meaning and value are foundational, not reducible to material facts alone. Peterson discusses the ramifications of the Nietzschean death of God, arguing that without a highest unifying value, societies face chaos as dominant forces like power and sexual hedonism vie for supremacy. This collapse results in nihilism or political chaos, analogous to the biblical episodes of the Golden Calf and the Tower of Babel. The disappearance of transcendent value fosters immature, willful governance marked by the conquest of whims through power rather than sacrifice and communal order. When asked about his personal belief in God, Peterson emphasizes acting as if God exists, focusing on faith as commitment and behavior rather than mere verbal assent to doctrine. He critiques the Protestant tradition's reduction of belief to propositional affirmation, noting that true belief demands concrete action and sacrifice. What one does in life reveals what one truly believes, and saying, "I believe in God," without that being reflected in behavior, is essentially meaningless. Peterson references Richard Dawkins' idea that every organism is a microcosm of its environment, and relates this to the biblical notion that humans are created in the image of God. This analogy suggests that the human soul reflects the larger divine pattern. He argues against atheist demands for physical proof of God, pointing out that divine reality likely exists at a different, non-material level, accessible through various psychophysiological states, prayer, or deep inquiry. An original proposition Peterson offers is that the spirit or archetype that reveals itself depends on the intent or aim of one's inquiry. For example, if a person embraces anger, their perceptions and decisions will align with that spirit. If one aims for the highest good, then the responding spirit guides one towards virtue and abundant life. This reinforces the biblical teaching of striving toward the pearl of great price, whereby the pursuit of the highest good paradoxically leads to the most fulfilled life. Peterson compares the difficulty of writing We Who Wrestle with God with his previous works, noting this book was easier due to improved health and his ongoing lecture work. It sits between the complexity of maps of meaning and the accessibility of 12 rules for life. While more academic, it remains practical and transformative, uniting scientific and theological dimensions in a way that aims to change readers' lives fundamentally. The conversation explains how every perception is a network of relationships surrounding an ideal form, a Platonic archetype, which large language models now objectively map. Symbols are central nodes in this network, and their meaning depends on their statistical associations within the cultural symbolic world. This structure explains why narratives powerfully shape perception, behavior, and culture, challenging reductionist, empiricist views that treat facts as value neutral. Peterson interprets biblical narratives as deep psychological truths presented through symbolic stories. For instance, the fall of Adam and Eve is analyzed as the entrance of pride-based suffering into human experience. The contrast between societal models in the Flood, Tower of Babel, and Abraham represent competing human paradigms: chaotic pride, centralized power, and sacrificial familial order, respectively. Community is fundamentally founded on voluntary sacrifice, Peterson insists. A focus on narrow individual whims would dissolve community into power struggles and chaos. Sacrifice is the stabilizing principle that aligns individual and collective interests. This understanding illuminates social dysfunctions and cultural crises evident in declining family structures and political polarization. Peterson addresses criticisms that religious belief is merely symbolic or utilitarian, arguing that religion and its narratives provide the highest order frameworks for action, meaning, and social cohesion. He claims that both science and religion are integral to understanding reality and human nature, and that post-Enlightenment developments are converging toward this integrated view. Throughout the interview, Peterson underscores how the biblical corpus offers profound archetypal insights into the human condition, ethics, sacrifice, and social order that are tested and validated across psychology, theology, and science. These texts remain deeply relevant as they encapsulate the tension between order and chaos, pride and sacrifice, power and community.